The term mid-century does a lot of work on the internet these days, and it has come to mean a lot of different things to different people. But when I think about perfecting an original mid-century home by polishing and maybe upgrading a few of its original details, I think of Susan Halla of Make It Mid-Century. She has dedicated herself to being the resource that people need to make perfect, period-appropriate choices for their homes, be they mid-century modern or mid-century modest. And she's got an encyclopedic knowledge of all things period-appropriate from front doors to Formica. I can't wait to share my chat with her with you today. Hey there, welcome back to Mid-Mod Remodel. This is the show about updating MCM homes, helping you match a mid-century home to your modern life. I'm your host, Della Hansman, architect and mid-century ranch enthusiast. You're listening to episode 1803. By the way, before we get into this, I have spoken to Susan on the pod before. Catch that in episode 1411 for more of her background, the slightly frustrated in architecture school to mid-century obsession pipeline that we both have been on, and her fantastic mid-century door and garage door kits, plus more. Oh, and among Susan's other talents and projects, she is an amazing aggregator of mid-century information and inspiration. So, are you already on her mailing list? She sends out a truly fantastic first of the month email that rounds up what's new in the mid-century community, shares deals, museum exhibits to check out, history lessons in detail, homeowner profiles to inspire you, and it's generally always worth a read and a reread. This is an email list you want to be on. You will star them in your inbox. I do. So pop over to the show notes. They are at midmod-midwest.com/1803 for a transcript of this conversation, links to pictures and products, and the proper place to get yourself on that email list. Okay, let's get into it. So today let's talk about what does mid-century mean, and more specifically, what does mid-century modern mean? Because people seem to get those pretty mixed up, use them pretty interchangeably, and they're not actually the same thing, are they?
No, they are not. I always liken it to, okay, people are going to hate me because this is kind of a math thing, but it's kind of like a square is a rectangle, but a rectangle is not a square.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So mid-century modern is mid-century, but mid-century is not mid-century modern. Mid-century modern is a subset of mid-century, and mid-century encompasses any kind of architecture that was prevalent during the mid-century period.
Right.
And I like to call it, I spread it a little bit. I say 1945 to about 1975. Just to kind of, I still think that's, it's a little bit on each tail end. There was some modern stuff kind of happening at the end of the 40s, and there was still some cool stuff happening at the beginning of the 70s. So I really like to encompass those tail ends too. But there was so much happening in that, just say their 50s and 60s. There are faux colonial that are mid-century.
Absolutely. I mean, the whole Levitt endeavor, those are all just as colonial. They had a few modern types later, but they're trying to make little salt box cottages out of simple square shapes, but absolutely.
Exactly. And in a lot of those houses that were just super plain on the outside, you might find something that's kind of zoomy modern little touches on the inside, and that belies the fact that they are from that era when you might not necessarily know it.
Mm-hmm. Or they can end up being kind of cottage twee on the inside with the little scroll work over the kitchen sink and pieces like that, the beaten wrought iron handles on the kitchen hardware. And yet on the outside, you read it as more modern, even if it was early modern or simple modern. So before we get into the hows and the whys and the wherefores, do you have a preference? Do you personally feel like you've got a favorite, or that you kind of play favorites among the different substyles of mid-century design?
I don't. I love them all. And I actually I have a book that you can download from our website that talks about all the different genres, and it really points out the details of each genre. And I think each area has its own specialties and its own things to love about them. Mm-hmm. Really, my hatred starts to get towards the modern, and we're talking tract home, non-architect. So that's much later than mid-century.
You go from a set of simple details into it's just gone so simple that there is no detail. And that, I think, is that transition zone of, conservatively, I would say 65 as the end of the period, but it can go into 75 as long as whoever was building the house or designing the object was still kind of pulling in those more playful details from the mid-century era. And the more minimalist it gets, the more sort of yeah, then we go into the 80s tract home that has no inherent style. It's just
Right,
object.
exactly. And I think
Yeah.
it's sort of like fashion, clothing fashion, where um, on the coasts you might have gotten the modern a
Right.
lot earlier than you did in the
Yeah.
Midwest, and then the Midwest it takes longer to get out of that too.
That's so true. I always tell people to think about the boundaries of mid-century from their era, and being house focused, I tend to think of it as when does the building boom post-war occur and stop?
Hmm.
So when was their industrial, success time? And that's kind of the moment, the 2 decade period that defines mid-century houses. But you're right. There's also sort of how did trends trickle down from TVs and magazines down to sort of what
Hmm.
you're finding in stores, what's being stocked in lumber yards, and the little details that show up in a neighborhood, even if it's not designed by the same person. I've just discovered a detail in my own neighborhood. I've been in this house for, I don't know the answer off the top of my head. Let's say 6 years. It's probably more now, but time constricts. And I just realized that all the houses in my neighborhood that aren't super fancy, which and it's like medium fancy for this neighborhood, it's a builder basic neighborhood, have double hung windows. And I've always sort of thought of double hung windows as not my favorite mid-century style, but
Hmm.
they all have a very thin division between two panes of glass in both the lower sash and the upper sash, which means that instead of two almost squares, they're a stack of four long, wide rectangles. And it gives them so much more elegance. And I noticed it in one house. I was like, oh, that house has its original windows. And then I've been looking around. I think it's every single house. I think it's the type of window they stocked at the local lumber yard, honestly. The default window.
Right.
And
It
so it
could be,
must have
but
just
that
come in.
rectangle is gives it that mid-century feel.
It's lovely. And I feel like people lose so much when they replace those with even they're like, I have a double hung window. I put in a double hung window. What could I have done wrong? But it doesn't feel the same because it doesn't have that pattern anymore. Anyway, yeah. So just like what are the default details that have trickled down style wise, fashion wise? I think that's a really useful way to look at it.
Right, exactly. And it's cities versus in the rural areas and things like that. So it all it that's why I kind of widened that time frame a little bit.
I think that's fair. Yeah, and we also get a little precious, I think, about decades. Like with fashion, you'll tell
Mhm.
yourself you know exactly what was the fashion from the 90s. And when you actually look it up, it was only really the end of that decade that had that iconic, like the denim shape or color or something like that, that we associate in our memory with 10 years. Fashions don't generally last 10 years, and
Right.
neither did home styles. So marvelous. So when you're looking at a house, I'm thinking about houses, but when you're looking at anything, do you feel like you want to categorize it before you want to respond to it? Or how do you think about that distinction between mid-century and mid-century modern?
Yeah, I think I categorize it first because especially like if I have a customer who is trying to add a new door to their house, for example, or
Yeah.
they're asking, I just get customers that call up and say, I need some advice. And I'm like, okay, I can give you some advice. And I want to know like kind of what the era of their home is first,
Mhm.
because I'm not going to put, um, say a one of sink that's the kind of the double bowl with the wide drain boards in either side.
Mhm.
Very 1940s. So I'm not going to
Right.
put that in a 60s house. Now, you as a homeowner may really love that, and I may have no say because it's your house. But I like to try to think, okay, so in the 60s or like get into the late 60s, we might even be talking about colored sinks that are like a green or a yellow, kind of that harvest gold, getting into the 70s with a hootie ring that's, in a Formica countertop, that sort of thing, versus somebody that's back in the early 50s. They may still have that drain board, or maybe that drain board's only one side, or maybe it's the countertop is made of linoleum. I mean, that would be kind of early 50s. So just kind of getting a venture on the era of the home helps, and then also the style in which the home was. Like, you're not going to get something totally trippy in a modest house.
Mhm.
But you're not going to also but you are going to get some more modest things in a like more high style mid-century house, because you're going to see some of those, like your basic pink bathroom, even
Right.
in a modern house, but that's what the bathroom's going to be.
Mhm. Right. There were always sort of upper and lower boundaries for where these sort of adventurousness, the scale of traditional to modern, even within mid-century, goes, depending on the decade it was built in, how much has been messed with since. So your instinct, though, seems it feels like you're talking from the place of preservation. You want to match new choices to the original standing of the house pretty precisely. That's your preference.
I guess that is my present preference personally, and I think the type of clientele that Make a Mid-Century draws are the people that are trying to restore their homes
That's
versus
true.
update their homes. So
Yeah.
that's, I think, it's a learned reaction from that too.
Well, and I think it's never a wrong place to start. And some of my clients are looking for more of an update, an upgrade than they are to put it back exactly how it was. But the thing that I hold firm on is that we have to feel like we're at least creating a familiar relationship between what's going on in the
Mm.
house. So we need to have some commonality of shape or of material or of some kind of design DNA that is connected, even if we're not putting it back exactly how it was or preserving it exactly how it was. We're sort of listening to what it was.
Right. I always say it's like when you see somebody who has done something in their house that is like, you can peg it and say, that's the 2010s, waterfall countertop, whatever,
Yeah.
then it'll outdate itself in just a couple of years. Whereas if you try to speak the language of your house is saying, it's going to always feel appropriate and
Yeah.
like it goes, and you're not going to try to be chasing trends, is what I like to say.
Exactly. Yeah. And we may or may not be able to achieve the actual, I can't tell if this is original, but it's always fun to have people kind of walk into the space and wonder. And certainly if they know you've made a change, that I've helped someone make a change, I don't want them to know exactly what decade that change was made in. I want it to feel mysterious, which it comes from tying back to the house. So one more thing before we wrap up. If you had to just off the top of your head list these subcategories of mid-century, what do they mean to you? What would you sort of look at when you're tagging details in a house or houses?
Well, modern is always easy to tell because it's
Right.
got like huge windows. It's got funky overlapping or kind of dipped in roof lines, things like
Mhm.
that. A more modest house, or even something that might not be of the style of a modern, it's going to have deeper eaves. It's going to have slightly lower roof lines. It might have um, the elongated brick that you might see. It
Yeah.
may have, if it still has its original door, it may have a funky door. Um, those are all things I would look at. And even, or it may have, the windows may be even like the steel casement windows with the individual
Right.
panes in it, things like that that you're going to see.
Are you thinking about a renovation for your house or a restoration? What is the difference? Let's get into it. Is there a better or a worse one of these two, or why would you choose one or the other? What do you tend to help people do in your work?
The clients that we have tend to be wanting to do more of a restoration than a renovation, but I think of renovation and restoration as kind of a timeline, kind
Mhm.
of like, and this is going to be controversial, but gender is kind of a spectrum, right? And so renovation, restoration are kind of two sides of a spectrum
Yeah.
of what do you want to do? And there's people that are going to be purist restoration, and then there's going to be people that are kind of in the middle because there may be some modern conveniences that they want. Like there are people that are going to go through and they're going to find the 1962 stove
Yeah.
that was originally specified with their house, and they are going to restore that stove and they're going to use that stove to cook. And then there's going to be people that are like, no way, I need a stove that has modern conveniences,
Hmm.
whatever. But as long as it looks okay with the house, that's cool. So I think people tend to lie somewhere more in the middle, or my people tend to lie somewhere from that left side to the middle. But I don't have as many people that are looking to like walk into Home Depot and walk out with a brand new,
Yeah.
really ugly sink base and countertop.
And that in a way, well, so I think it's interesting. There's the timeline, there's the spectrum of, fully preserve it to my
Get
mind, I'm
get
thinking
rid of
about it to
everything.
update it, to change it so much to make it really modern. The Home Depot, I feel like, is a little bit of an outlier. It's just like you don't care and you're not interested in quality. But from my client base, we don't tend to work with the most preservation of preservationists because that ends up, I mean, it's a labor of love, and it requires you to make some compromises in the way you actually just like live your life day to day in the house. But we do work with people who want it to look as close to the original as possible. I've had clients who have fully sourced, like Facebook Marketplace, a set of toilet, sink, shower, tub, and then recreated a full color block bathroom, sometimes multiple times in different rooms in their house, which I adore. And then we also have people who come all the way over to the end of like, we really want it to feel pretty contemporary, but still to pick up the material language of a mid-century house. I personally, for our business, draw the line that if you want to go beyond that, if you want to take it to like, it's a lovely modern box, but it's got nothing of the mid-century left in it. I can't stop you from doing that to your house, but I'm also not going to help you. So that's sort of we're in the middle, in the sort of fuzzy middle of that. And I think you tip more towards the early to put it back. But you are so well equipped to do that. I'm not sure everybody that's hearing us chat right now knows what it is that you do. So what are some of the ways that you help people put their houses back just like they were?
My elevator speech, when anybody asks me what it is that I do, I say we design and manufacture materials for restoring mid-century homes. Mm-hmm. So my goal with this business has always been trying to provide materials that people are looking for more on that spectrum of restoration of a home. So that may be, one of the things we have is that old laminate countertop that has the little glitter embedded in it. We even just came out with a brand new product that has a star pattern with then the glitter in it too. We have kits that help people make a new front door, a new old front door, but you have then a new front door, but it looks like it always belonged to your house, and it's not plastic, and it's not,
not leaded glass.
Not leaded glass, not one of those. I always think it reminds me of the Barbie dream house from the 1970s, because that's what I had. But those ones with the big oval leaded glass in the middle of the door, because I think that's what the Barbie dream house had. So, but those are just not mid-century appropriate. Or just the half fan light. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't ever find that except maybe a mid-century house that was from a more of a colonial revival. See, right. Della's in our other conversation.
Right.
About mid-century versus mid-century modern.
Yeah, no, there are so many different areas, and you have great kits and materials and supplies to help people sort of pick the moment they're aiming back for and then make it happen, make it mid-century. I think it's an interesting question too, because a home is so personal. It's not a museum. And in fact, that's a phrase I hear from people all the time. We want to make it look like mid-century, but we're not trying to live in a museum. But I do think that you can work hard and sort of pull those pieces back together if you know where to find some of the missing pieces. If you can find the laminate for the countertop, which people don't think about laminate for their countertops. And of course, do whatever kind of countertop speaks to you. But I have my original laminate countertops, and they are bomb-proof. They do not show mess. If I let a little bit of toast grit add up on them, you can't tell unless you're looking really closely. I don't put hot surfaces down on them, but they're, water spills, they do the job. And they have that lovely little sort of like bump up at the counter edge. So even when I pour boiling water on the counter, it doesn't end up on my feet. It's great. So yeah, I think the more that we can give people the tools, the resources they need to put things back, the more we can benefit from those nice design insights that people came up with in the mid-century.
Right. And that's the whole reason why I started the business, is because I live in a mid-century modest house, and I was looking for a new front door for my house, and I couldn't, it was like trying to find stuff. And then just generally speaking, trying to find stuff, because you can't walk into a big box store. And there actually, I will say, I don't think it's me necessarily, but since I started my business, there are now some like doors that you can get very limited designs at some of the big box stores that are more mid-century. So you can see that we're making a difference, but it isn't something that you can just go anywhere and find. And so that's why we were trying to kind of become a clearinghouse for that type of material.
Yeah. And you've become not just a resource for one thing, but a place people can come and get guidance and a whole host of materials and resources they need to make those more restoration choices. You had actually, where was it? You'd used a great combination of phrases, a resto or a reno, which I love. And so you find people are mostly coming to you for the resto end of it. But do you think there's any advice you would give someone who was thinking more renovation if they were maybe resto curious? What would you advise them to consider before they made a move?
I always advise people that they need to listen to what their house is telling them. Really kind of understand the era of your house before you start doing anything rash to it. Kind of do a little bit of research. Don't just like it. HGTV has done us all a bad disservice, I believe, because people are now starting to rebel against that whole gray everything and shiplap everything and farmhouse everything. So thank goodness they're starting to rebel. But some people are going to walk into a house and they already have decided before they bought the house that I'm going to make my house farmhouse.
Yeah.
But you walk into a 1960s mid-century house and you do farmhouse and it just feels off.
Yeah, it's just gluing it to the surfaces rather than listening to the shape of the house or plus to thoroughly, and I don't recommend this. If you wanted to thoroughly farmhouse a mid-century house though, you're basically doing a full gut. So it's so comprehensive. You've just made so much work for yourself. If you want, well, you can't really go buy a cute old farmhouse everywhere. There's a lot more mid-century houses than original farmhouses.
You can buy a lot of modern
you can buy a lot of 80s nonsense
houses.
houses and put farmhouse on them if that's your choice. But a mid-century house comes with some really fun details if you just want to listen to them. So I think that if you're hoping to make some tweaks, you can maybe preserve or clean up and keep some parts of the house and then modify some of them. And you end up with an easier project that feels more cohesive and is more timeless and trend proof. It's a win-win-win.
And there are just some fun things from mid-century that if you have it in your house, don't get rid of it. Like the in-wall thing that you turn around that has your toothbrush and cup in it. Because, for example, it's like that's a very mid-century thing that you see in some mid-century houses. It's very coveted. People are looking for them all the time. But it's closed, so it's in your bathroom. Your toothbrushes aren't out getting germs on them all the time. They're tucked away. Nobody has to see them, and they're not getting all germy. How perfect is that for modern living?
This is what I don't know if you've looked into this. It might take more manufacturing capacity to put it together, but some of those lines, like the rotating hidden toothbrush holders, and they came in sets, like the magazine rack and the towel bars, and all in a combination.
Now you just need a phone rack.
I mean, yes, I do. Like, I will confess that we all do. Why isn't anybody making that line? Home Depot, I don't like you, but if you're listening, somebody should be. Kohler could collaborate with someone on that or something. They do restoration styles of fixtures. Couldn't they do some of those finishes for bathrooms too? But maybe that is on your wish list of fun items too.
Oh, I have lots of fun ideas.
Before I let you go on this one, what is your next up project, or maybe your farthest away pie in the sky dream, your preference for
our next up project? So our Q1 goal was to launch our Sparkle Star, which is our mid-century line of sparkled star laminate. But our Q2 goal, and Q2 is actually, we're in June, so we're out of Q2, but it is in the works of restarting another tile line. So we had been repping a tile line with mid-century colors in it, and they were one of the last. There's one other remaining place that does make mid-century colored tiles, but this place we were repping decided they weren't going to do it anymore, and so we were out of luck. So I have been working with a major manufacturer to recreate the most popular colors that people are looking for. I'm looking to start with the pink and the seafoam. And so the solid color tiles for people that not only are trying to recreate an entire bathroom, but also I have found that those colors match really closely to the original vintage colors. So
if you need to repair or do a fresh wall because you had to deal with plumbing, you can put back without. Oh, I love that. Bring back the pink bathrooms.
That's right.
So obviously there's more to be said here. We actually have another convo prepped, and that will cover what you can learn from living in a mid-century house and why you really want to if you can, and also a list of what not to do if you want your mid-century home's choices to last. Spoiler alert, we'll start right at the top with do not paint your brick. this is a chant that Susan and I can do together. Meanwhile, though, pop back to the show notes page, midmod-midwest.com/1803 to get your name on Susan's email list. Seriously, right away, so you can get her August 1st newsletter and to check out some of her fun front door and garage door kits too. Even if you already like your front door, like I do, they'll have you dreaming of other options, alternatives, future projects. Okay, that's all for today, friends. I'll catch you next month, in August.